I've been sitting on this for a while, wondering if it's even worth talking about, but it's been eating at me, and I need to get it out. I'm 29, and for the past 10 years, I've been working as an electrician. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't come with a corner office or fancy networking events, but I love what I do. There's something deeply satisfying about fixing something broken and seeing it come back to life. When I was starting out, it wasn't easy. I went to trade school during the day, worked nights to save up for my first set of tools, and spent years sweating it out in attics and basements as an apprentice. Those weren't exactly the glory days, but I learned a lot. I'm proud of where I've gotten since then. I run my own small business now. It's just me, my truck, and a few loyal clients, but I'm building something real. I've been saving up for a house, little by little, and though it's not flashy, it feels good knowing I got here on my own. That pride has always kept me grounded, even when I've had to deal with the occasional judgmental comment. You know the type, people who look down on anyone who doesn't wear a suit to work. But it never really got to me, because I thought I surrounded myself with people who saw me for who I am. That's what I thought about Melissa, anyway. Melissa is 30, works in corporate marketing, and is the kind of woman who walks into a room and owns it. She's polished, ambitious, and has this ability to make every conversation feel like a strategic move. When we first started dating 3 years ago, I was completely drawn in. She seemed to admire my work ethic, even if it wasn't a world she understood. She used to say things like, "I love how passionate you are about what you do," or, "You're so good with your hands. It's impressive." At the time, I ate it up. I remember once asking her why she was interested in me when she could easily date someone more like her, someone who lived and breathed the corporate world. She smiled and said, "Because you're real. You're not like the guys in my office, always trying to prove something." Looking back, I wonder if she actually meant it, or if that was just something she said to make me feel special. Now that I think about it, there were moments when I should have seen the cracks. Like the time I told her I wanted to expand my business, hire a couple of apprentices so I could take on bigger jobs and spend less time on site. She smiled and said, "That's cute, babe. You'd be like a little boss." I laughed it off, but it stung a little. It felt like she wasn't taking me seriously, but I pushed that thought aside. Melissa has always been passionate about her career, and I admired that. She'd talk about how tough it was to climb the corporate ladder, how she had to fight to prove herself in meetings dominated by men, and I respected her hustle. But as I'm sitting here now, I realize she never showed the same interest in my work. When I talked about my business, the clients I worked with, the challenges I faced, her responses were polite but surface level. It was like she was nodding along just to be nice, not because she cared. Earlier this year, she got a big promotion, and everything shifted. Suddenly, her world became all about her colleagues and work events. She dropped names constantly. "Oh, Sam is such a visionary," or, "You should meet Jessica. She's a powerhouse." I noticed she stopped mentioning me. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said, "You're not really part of that world, babe. It's not a big deal." It stung more than I wanted to admit, but I let it go. Then she started talking about this big holiday party her office was hosting. She brought it up for weeks, saying it was a huge deal and that she really wanted me to come. "It'll be fun," she said. "You'll get to see the world I'm always telling you about." I wasn't thrilled about spending a night with her coworkers, but she seemed so excited about it that I couldn't say no. As the party got closer, I started to feel nervous. Melissa was planning every detail, what we'd wear when we'd arrive, even the kind of conversations I should have. "Just talk about your business," she told me. "People love hearing about small businesses. They'll think it's cool." I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to prep me, like I was some sort of project she needed to polish up for her colleagues. The night of the party, I put on my best suit, the only suit I own, to be honest, and did my best to look presentable. Melissa, as always, looked incredible, like she'd stepped out of a magazine. When we arrived at the venue, I was immediately out of my depth. The place was decked out in tasteful, expensive decorations, and everyone looked like they belonged on Wall Street. I felt like I'd stumbled into a world I wasn't meant to be in. Melissa was in her element. She worked the room effortlessly, laughing, chatting, and introducing me to everyone. At first, I was proud of her. She's good at what she does, and it was clear her colleagues respected her. But then came the introductions. "This is Ryan, my fiancé," she said, smiling. "He's an electrician. Keeps everything running at home." Her tone was light, almost joking, and her coworkers laughed politely. I brushed it off at first, telling myself she didn't mean anything by it. But then it happened again, and again. Every time we met someone new, Melissa found a way to frame what I do as a punchline. "Oh, he's great with his hands. He's like my personal handyman," she said once, and everyone chuckled. "He's like Bob the Builder, but cuter," another time. The laughter stung more and more each time. By the end of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't her partner. I was her prop, something she could show off for laughs. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I stayed quiet for most of the night, trying to brush off the comments and focus on just getting through the event. Melissa was in her zone. Laughing and chatting like this was the highlight of her year. I stood beside her, smiling when I needed to, shaking hands, and doing my best to make small talk with people I had absolutely nothing in common with. Every now and then, I caught a sympathetic glance from one of the waitstaff, and honestly, I felt more at ease with them than I did with anyone else in the room. It wasn't until the toast that everything fell apart. Melissa had been looking forward to this part of the night, saying how it was her chance to acknowledge her team and make an impression. When she stood up, glass in hand, the room quieted immediately. She commanded attention effortlessly, like she'd been doing this her whole life. She started off strong, thanking her colleagues and praising their hard work. It was clear she was a natural at this, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pride. But then she turned her attention to me. "And of course," she said, her tone shifting to something playful, "I have to give a special shout-out to my fiancé, Ryan." She smiled at me, and for a second, I thought maybe this was going to be her moment to redeem herself, to show that she did respect me after all. But no, he's not really a corporate guy, she said, grinning as the room chuckled softly. "But if anyone's dishwasher breaks, he's your guy." The laughter was louder this time, echoing through the room like a punch to the gut. I sat there, frozen, my face burning as dozens of eyes turned to me. Melissa, oblivious, or maybe just indifferent, was soaking up the attention. She raised her glass and carried on like she hadn't just humiliated me in front of everyone. I don't even remember the rest of her toast. I just remember the sound of the laughter and the feeling of being completely and utterly disrespected. When she finally sat back down, I leaned over and whispered, "I'm going outside for some air." She barely glanced at me, too busy chatting with the people around her, and waved me off like it was no big deal. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, and I could finally breathe again. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my hands, which were shaking from a mix of anger and embarrassment. The scene replayed in my head, over and over. The laughter, the way she'd smiled as if she was proud of herself, and the looks from her co-workers, some amused, some pitying. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, that Melissa didn't realize how her words had come across. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a one-time slip. This was just another example of how she saw me. I was still trying to process everything when I heard the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement. "Ryan," she called out, her voice light and casual, like nothing had happened. When I didn't respond, she stepped closer. "Hey, what's going on? Why'd you sneak out like that?" I turned to face her, and the look on her face, the mix of confusion and mild annoyance, made my frustration boil over. "Do you seriously not know why I walked out?" She blinked, clearly taken aback. "No? What's wrong?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Melissa, do you even hear yourself? That toast. You turned me into a joke in front of your entire office." Her expression shifted, her brows furrowing. "Oh, come on, Ryan," she said, rolling her eyes. "It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny." "Yeah," I snapped, "because they don't know me. All they know is what you've told them, that I'm just some handyman you keep around to fix things. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" She sighed, crossing her arms like I was the one being difficult. "You're overreacting. It wasn't that deep. I was just trying to lighten the mood." "Lighten the mood?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Melissa, I've spent years building my business. I've worked my ass off to get to where I am, and you reduced all of that to a punchline. How do you think that makes me feel? Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging what I was saying, she gave me this exasperated look. Ryan, you're being way too sensitive. It's not like I said anything untrue. You're an electrician. It's not exactly glamorous. Those words hit me like a brick. I stared at her, stunned, as she just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to get over it. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Wow, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. So that's how you really see me. Not as your partner, not as someone who's worked hard to build a life for himself, but as some guy who fixes things. Is that it? She threw her hands up, clearly frustrated. That's not what I'm saying, Ryan. You're putting words in my mouth. I was just trying to make people laugh. You're the one turning this into something it's not. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. No, Melissa. I'm finally seeing things for what they are. Her face hardened, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The sound of people laughing and music playing inside the venue felt distant, like it was happening in another world. I realized then that I was done. Done making excuses for her, done pretending everything was fine, done letting her treat me like I was less than. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess myself. Her eyes narrowed. Do what? This, I said, motioning between us. Us. This relationship. She stared at me like I just slapped her, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're kidding, right? You're seriously breaking up with me over a joke? It's not just the joke, I said, meeting her eyes. It's everything. It's how you see me, how you've always seen me. I deserve better than this, better than you. I turned and walked away before she could respond, heading back inside to grab my coat. I didn't care about the stares or the whispers from her colleagues. Let them talk. I was done. When I walked back into the party to grab my coat, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The buzz of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional laughter all blurred together as I moved through the crowd. People turned to look at me, some glancing over their shoulders, while others openly stared. I could feel their curiosity, their whispers. Part of me wanted to shout, "Mind your business," but I kept my head high. As I reached the coat rack, I felt Melissa behind me before she even said a word. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, quick and sharp, matching the anger I could feel radiating off her. "Ryan," she hissed, her voice low but firm. "What the hell are you doing?" I turned around slowly, meeting her eyes. She was furious, but there was a flicker of something else, panic. Melissa wasn't used to being out of control, and the fact that I'd walked out and left her standing there in front of her coworkers had clearly rattled her. "What I'm doing," I said evenly, "is leaving." Her jaw tightened as she crossed her arms. "You're really going to make a scene? Here? In front of everyone?" I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Melissa, you already made the scene. All I'm doing is getting out before it gets worse." She glanced around nervously, noticing how people nearby were starting to take notice. A few were pretending not to listen, their conversations quieter than before, while others didn't even bother hiding their curiosity. Her voice dropped even lower as she leaned in. "You're being ridiculous. This is so immature." I stepped back, shaking my head. "Immature? Are you serious? You spent the whole night tearing me down, making me into a joke for your coworkers, and now I'm the one being ridiculous?" She rolled her eyes, her voice sharpening. "Oh, come on. It wasn't like that. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite myself. "You called me Bob the Builder, your handyman, the guy for dishwashers. Melissa, you made me sound like a tool you keep around the house, not your fiancé. How is that not disrespectful?" Her face hardened, and her arms tightened across her chest. "It was just a joke, Ryan," she snapped. "You need to stop being so sensitive. If you were secure in yourself, this wouldn't bother you." That word, sensitive, was like gasoline on a fire. I'd heard it before, used as a way to dismiss my feelings or make me feel like I was the problem. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This isn't about being sensitive," I said quietly. It's about respect. And tonight, you made it crystal clear that you don't respect me. Her mouth opened, then shut again as she searched for something to say. Before she could, someone from her office, a man in a sharp gray suit, approached. Hey, everything okay over here? He asked, his tone polite but wary. Melissa turned to him, her fake smile snapping into place like a mask. Oh, yes, everything's fine, she said quickly, her voice unnaturally sweet. Just a little misunderstanding. The man looked between us, his eyebrows raised slightly. He didn't seem convinced but nodded anyway. All right, well, let me know if you need anything, he said before walking away. As soon as he was gone, Melissa's smile vanished, replaced by a glare. Do you see what you're doing? She hissed. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. Embarrassing you? I repeated, my voice rising again despite myself. Melissa, you spent the entire night mocking me, turning me into a punchline, and now you're worried about how you look. Unbelievable. She took a step closer, lowering her voice again. You're twisting this, she said, her tone dripping with frustration. I was just trying to include you. You should be thanking me for making you part of the conversation instead of sulking like a child. That was it. That was the moment I realized there was no point in trying to explain myself anymore. She wasn't listening, and she wasn't going to. Melissa, I said slowly, my voice steady but firm, you didn't include me. You mocked me. And the worst part? You don't even see what's wrong with that. Her face turned red, whether from anger or embarrassment, I wasn't sure. You're acting ridiculous, she snapped. Do you even hear yourself? You think you're so special because you run a little business fixing wiring? Guess what, Ryan? It's not that impressive. I stared at her, her words hanging in the air between us like poison. For a second, I almost responded, almost let myself get pulled into the argument she clearly wanted. But then I realized something. This wasn't worth it. She wasn't worth it. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the engagement ring, and held it out to her. Good luck finding someone you actually respect, I said calmly. Her eyes widened as she stared at the ring in my hand. You're serious? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. Dead serious, I said. I deserve better than this. Better than you. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the party, clutching the ring and glaring daggers into my back. Walking out of that party felt surreal. The moment I stepped into the cold night air, the noise and chaos of the event faded behind me. It was just me and my thoughts, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I wasn't entirely sure how I felt. Relieved? Angry? Sad? Maybe all of it. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to. The whole scene kept replaying in my mind. Melissa's fake smile, her cutting words, the way she acted like I was the one embarrassing her. By the time I got to my apartment, the weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. 3 years of my life. Gone. Just like that. The first night after the breakup was rough. I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through everything she'd ever said or done that should have been a red flag. How had I ignored it for so long? Was I that desperate to make it work? That blind to who she really was? The next morning, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Unsurprisingly, most of them were from Melissa. Can we just talk about this? You're seriously doing this over a joke? I don't understand why you're being so dramatic. Are you seriously ignoring me now? Grow up, Ryan. I didn't reply to any of them. What was there to say? She clearly didn't understand why I'd walked away, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood to explain it to her. I needed time to think, to process everything, without her trying to spin the situation in her favor. The texts kept coming for the next few days, ranging from pleading to angry to outright insulting. Eventually, I blocked her number. That should have been the end of it. But of course, Melissa wasn't the type to let things go quietly. I started getting calls and texts from mutual friends. Apparently, Melissa had decided to take her version of events public. She was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd stormed out of the party over a harmless joke, and that I was too insecure to handle a strong woman. A couple of friends even sent me screenshots of her social media posts. One particularly grating post featured a selfie of her, perfectly styled as always, with the caption, "Dodged a bullet." Some people can't handle a woman with ambition and a sense of humor. The comments were full of her friends hyping her up. "You're better off without him. Sounds like he couldn't handle how amazing you are. Good riddance to fragile egos." It pissed me off, but more than anything, it hurt. She was rewriting our entire relationship, turning me into some insecure, bitter guy who couldn't handle her success. It wasn't true, and deep down, I think she knew that. But it didn't matter. Melissa was always good at controlling the narrative. What surprised me, though, were the private messages I started getting from some of her coworkers. One of them wrote, "Hey, Ryan, I was at the party, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I laughed at the toast, but honestly, I felt weird about it. Melissa always talks about you like you're beneath her, and seeing it in person just confirmed it. You deserve better." Another message came from a woman I'd only met once or twice. I've known Melissa for years, and she's always had this way of making people feel small to make herself look bigger. I don't think she even realizes she's doing it, but after what I saw at the party, I think you made the right call walking away. Those messages meant more to me than I expected. For so long, I'd convinced myself that the little jabs, the dismissive comments, were all in my head. Hearing other people say they noticed it too made me realize I wasn't crazy. It wasn't just a bad night or a misunderstanding. This was who Melissa was. A few days later, Julia, one of Melissa's closest friends, reached out. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when I picked up the phone, her tone was surprisingly calm. "Ryan," she said, "I know this is none of my business, but I wanted to tell you something." She paused, like she was debating whether or not to say it, and then continued. "Melissa's been saying for a while that she settled for you because she thought you'd be easy to control. She said she didn't think you'd ever leave her because you'd feel too lucky to have her." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd already walked away, hearing that confirmed everything I'd started to suspect. Melissa hadn't just looked down on me. She'd actively assumed I wouldn't have the self-respect to leave. "Thanks for telling me," I said, my voice tight. "No problem," Julia replied. "For what it's worth, I think you're better off. You deserve someone who actually appreciates you." That conversation was the final nail in the coffin. Any lingering doubts I had about my decision were gone. I hadn't just made the right choice, I dodged a bullet. Blocking Melissa on everything gave me the space I needed to start focusing on myself. I poured my energy into work, taking on more projects and updating my tools. I even started teaching an evening class for aspiring electricians, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. It felt good to share my knowledge, to see others get excited about the trade I'd spent so much time mastering. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant need to prove myself, to fit into someone else's world. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd given up until I finally stepped away. Looking back, I couldn't believe how long I'd stayed with someone who thought so little of me. In the weeks after the breakup, life started to feel lighter. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but every day that passed felt like I was peeling off another layer of the weight I'd been carrying for years. Melissa had consumed so much of my life. Her goals, her plans, her opinions, that I hadn't realized how much space she'd taken up until she was gone. Work became my escape and my focus. I took on bigger projects, things I might have hesitated to try before. I upgraded my tools, invested in new equipment, and even started brainstorming ways to expand my business. For years, I'd put off these ideas, always prioritizing stability over growth because Melissa made me feel like my work wasn't good enough to take risks. Without her voice in my head, I felt more confident to move forward. The evening classes I was teaching became one of the highlights of my week. It started with a small group of people, some younger, some older, all of them eager to learn. Sharing what I knew, seeing them light up when they finally understood a tricky concept or successfully wired something for the first time. It was rewarding in a way I hadn't expected. It reminded me of why I loved what I did, why I had fought so hard to build this life for myself. Socially, I started reconnecting with old friends. During my relationship with Melissa, I'd slowly let those friendships drift. She never outright told me not to hang out with my friends, but there was always this unspoken disapproval. If I mentioned grabbing a drink with Eric or catching up with Kyle, she'd give me this look or make a comment like, "Shouldn't you be focusing on your business?" Over time, it felt easier to just avoid the conversation altogether. But now I had the freedom to show up for the people who actually cared about me. One night, Eric and I were sitting at a bar, swapping stories over beers, when he said, "Man, I don't know how you put up with her for so long. She was always so condescending." I raised an eyebrow. "You thought that too?" "Thought it." He laughed. "Dude, everyone did. We didn't say anything because we figured you were happy, but honestly, the way she talked to you sometimes," he shook his head. "You deserve better, man." Hearing that stung, but it also validated everything I'd been feeling. It wasn't just me. Melissa's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. It was just that no one had wanted to step in, afraid they'd overstep. I couldn't blame them. When you're in it, it's hard to see the truth, even when it's staring you in the face. Around the same time, I sold the engagement ring. I debated keeping it for a while, but every time I looked at it, it felt like a weight, like a reminder of all the ways I'd let myself down by staying with someone who didn't respect me. Selling it felt like closing a chapter. I took the money and booked a trip to the mountains, a place I'd always wanted to visit but never got around to because Melissa thought rustic vacations were boring. That trip changed everything for me. For a week, I hiked, camped, and spent my nights under the stars. Sitting by a fire, staring up at the vast, open sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For so long, I'd been chasing this idea of success that wasn't even mine. I'd let Melissa's standards, her vision of what life should look like, dictate my choices. Out there, in the quiet of the mountains, I realized I didn't need any of it. I didn't need the validation of someone who couldn't see my worth. When I came back, I felt like a different person. I revamped my business plan, started setting goals that excited me, and made a point to prioritize the things that brought me joy. I stopped worrying about what other people thought of me, whether they were clients, co-workers, or potential dates, and focused on what I thought of myself. It wasn't long before I heard through the grapevine that Melissa's perfect little world wasn't as perfect anymore. Apparently, word about the party had spread around her office. Her co-workers weren't thrilled with the way she'd handled herself that night, and some of the higher-ups had taken notice. One of her colleagues, the one who messaged me after the party, told me Melissa had been passed over for a promotion she'd been gunning for. "She's been so tense lately," they said. "Like she knows everyone's talking about her, but she won't admit it." I didn't revel in her downfall, but I won't lie. It felt like karma had finally caught up with her. Melissa's need to put others down to boost herself wasn't just a problem in our relationship. It was a flaw in her character. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. I started dating again, slowly and cautiously, this time with a much clearer idea of what I wanted in a partner. Respect wasn't negotiable, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less. Looking back, I realized the breakup wasn't just about walking away from Melissa. It was about walking back to myself, reclaiming the parts of me I'd lost trying to fit into her world. I wasn't angry anymore, just grateful. Grateful that I'd seen the truth before it was too late. Months after everything, my life felt like it had turned a corner. The chaos of the breakup, the anger, and the hurt had all settled into something quieter, something manageable. It wasn't that I didn't think about Melissa or what had happened. I did. But the sting of it was gone. Now, when I looked back, I saw the relationship for what it was, a lesson, a hard one, but one I needed. My business was thriving in ways I hadn't imagined a year ago. Hiring an apprentice had been a game changer, not just for lightening the workload, but for the sense of pride it gave me. Teaching someone else the trade, watching them grow, felt like passing the torch in a way. The evening classes were still going strong too, and every time a student told me how much they learned or thanked me for helping them start their own career, it reminded me of why I loved what I did. Socially, I felt more connected than I had in years. The friends I drifted away from during my time with Melissa were back in my life, and they weren't shy about reminding me how much they'd missed me. My family, too, noticed the change. My mom once joked, "You're smiling more these days. Feels like we got the old Ryan back." And she was right. I felt like myself again, maybe even better than before. As for dating, I was taking things slow. I wasn't in a rush to jump into another relationship, but I'd gone on a few dates with someone I'd met through a mutual friend. Her name was Emily, and she was as down-to-earth as they came. She didn't care about flashy titles or appearances. On our second date, when I mentioned my work, she lit up and said, "That's so cool. I've always wondered how electricians figure all that stuff out." It was such a small thing, but it meant more to me than I could explain. Hearing genuine curiosity and appreciation instead of a dismissive joke made me realize just how low the bar had been set in my last relationship. With Emily, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I could just be myself, and that was enough. One day, about 6 months after the breakup, I got a call from Julia, Melissa's former best friend. We hadn't spoken since she told me the truth about what Melissa had been saying behind my back, so I wasn't sure why she was reaching out. "I just thought you'd want to know," she said. "Melissa's been struggling at work. People at the office still talk about that night. Her reputation took a hit, and she's been passed over for a couple of big opportunities. I think she's finally realizing she's not untouchable." I didn't say much, just thanked her for the update and hung up. I didn't feel happy about Melissa's struggles, but I didn't feel bad for her either. Actions have consequences, and she was finally facing hers. The way she treated people wasn't sustainable, and now it was catching up with her. As for me, I didn't need to dwell on Melissa or what she thought of me anymore. I'd built a life I was proud of, surrounded by people who actually cared about me and valued what I brought to the table. One evening, I was sitting outside on my small apartment balcony, a cold beer in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My truck was parked below, tools loaded up for the next day's job, and the sound of the city buzzed faintly in the background. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I thought about how different my life could have been if I'd stayed with Melissa, if I'd let her chip away at my confidence, my sense of self, until there was nothing left. And I thought about the version of me who walked out of that party, angry, humiliated, and unsure of what the future would hold. He wouldn't have believed it then, but that moment was the best thing that ever happened to him. Now, I know better. Respect isn't optional. It's not something you earn by compromising who you are or by bending over backward to fit into someone else's world. It's the foundation of any real partnership, and without it, nothing else matters. To anyone reading this, if you're in a relationship where you feel small, where your accomplishments are dismissed, or your dreams are belittled, leave. Walk away. I promise you, it'll be the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it'll also be the most freeing. Because at the end of the day, you deserve someone who sees you for who you are, who respects what you do, and who makes you feel like you're enough. And if you haven't found that person yet, start by being that for yourself.